All right, let's go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for coming. My name is Sharday Mills. I'm one of the librarians here at SFCC. I'm one of the presenters for this workshop. I am also joined by my colleague, Heather. I'll let her introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Heather Morgan. I'm another librarian here at SFCC.
All right, so today's workshop is going to be about copyright basics for students. So what exactly are we going to be discussing in this workshop today? We're going to go into that into some detail, but we like to check in at the start of every workshop to let you know that we ask that that you be present in this space, that we're respectful to everyone on Zoom, and know this is a safe space. We're going to ask for some active participation. But let's say if you're in a car or someplace where it's not quite safe for you to answer a poll or respond, that's perfectly okay. But we do ask you to be present. Know that you are welcome to unmute yourself and talk with us. Also, one of us will always be keeping an eye on the chat box. So if you would prefer to type a question or interact, we love that as well. And then just so you know, the session is being recorded. However, at the library, whatever is said by a student, your face, voice is always taken out and edited out at the end of recording since we're not a full course. Know that we will post this, but if you're interacting with us, that won't be part of the recording. We just like to let you know that. And at the end, there will be an opportunity for you to fill out an evaluation form if you're attending for extra credit or participation points from a class. So at this point, Heather, I didn't know if you wanted to ask everyone to introduce themselves and see what they were hoping to get out of the workshop. I know you had mentioned something earlier, so I wanted to check in with you.
Yeah, actually, it would be kind of interesting. What do people attending this workshop think that or hoping they're going to get out of this workshop? If you'd like to unmute yourself and say it aloud, or if you want to share that in the chat box, we would love to hear what you're hoping to get out of it, because sometimes that will also help us know where we might need to spend a little more time on the presentation. I appreciate honesty. That is totally a perfect reason to be here. We assume actually probably a lot of people are here for the same reason.
Yep, it's as confirmed by the chat. Awesome. Okay.
There you go.
Hopefully, I see some optimism here that hopefully I'll learn something new. I hope so too. So definitely feel free, if you have some experience in this regard as well, or something you want to talk about or share, this is a great opportunity to do that as well. So definitely consider this a conversation between us and you. So at the very least, for what we've planned for the workshop today, we're going to go over the basics of what copyright is. I think we'd be remiss if we did not do that. We're going to talk a little bit about why you should care, which I think is important in contextualizing it within your life as a student, but also you as a person. Then we're briefly going to talk about public domain. And then I think fair use is a really important conversation. So determining what you can and cannot use. And then there is something called Creative Commons. So these are works where there are specific license that allow you to use other people's work in certain ways. So there is a way that you can actually search for Creative Commons. So we're going to be discussing where you can do that. And then we're going to wrap up by talking about note sharing websites and how that kind of applies to you as a student and your relationship with your instructors in your classes. All right, so I think if you interact with copyright in any way, you probably will see this disclaimer fairly often. Librarians aren't lawyers, and so we do want to let you know that anything that we discuss today shouldn't be construed as legal advice. When you talk about copyright, things can get a little complicated, and some things are, I'm just going to admit one person here real quick. Okay.
I was like, don't worry, I got it.
So we just like to put that disclaimer out at the start, is please know that nothing we're about to say, please don't take it as actual legal advice. Instead, we're thinking of this as a general guide of certain things that you want to keep in mind as one, you interact with materials as a student, and hopefully some of this will be applicable to you as a person in your everyday life as well. And so it seems like some people feel like they have some familiarity with copyright. That's awesome. So I'm actually going to pause here and see, like, can anyone put in the chat box and tell me what copyright is? Ooh, great. So I like where you're going here. So, yes. So we're talking about a bundle. We usually call this a bundle of rights. And I think what's interesting about this, you did mention that it's for written works. And that is true. It does include written works, but it also includes a lot of other things as well. So the basic idea of copyright is it basically protects, as our thank you for volunteering, is protection of intellectual work. And so when we say intellectual work, that can be a doodle on a napkin, lyrics to a song, anything that's really what we call a fixed work or a tangible work. So something that is kind of has a not necessarily physical, but like a tangible presence. So in this instance, it could be something like lyrics to a song, music to a song, something you've drawn, code you've created from a programming perspective. And so the whole point of this is to foster creativity. So when it comes to copyright, we say that the creator has a bundle of rights. And so I am going to go over what that bundle includes specifically. So in this instance, that means that you can make copies of the work, you can distribute copies. So that means you can actually give away part of your copyright. You could sell it, rent it, lend it, give certain portions of it away. It also means the ability to perform or display the work publicly, or to make derivatives of that work, translations, adaptations, or reinterpretations. So basically, it's that idea that like, oh, sorry, someone, I can't turn that off. That's my phone. It's connected to our main desk. Hopefully someone will pick that up in a second. But basically the idea here is that you have ownership over those rights. And you can go into the little bit of like the nitty gritty of like, because you can sell off or lend or rent certain parts of that, it can get quite complicated. I think the interpretation of copyright is where you definitely get into that part where it becomes more of a legal conversation where like lawyers are looking at the specifics. But the hope for today is that you just get familiar with the concept of copyright and how it applies to you, mostly as a student, since we are doing this from a school perspective. But hopefully there's going to be some helpful tips in here as well that will apply to your everyday life. And so a few things to keep in mind with copyright. It's automatic. We actually see this question quite often, like, do you have to file something or apply to get copyright? And you do not. It is something that is inherent. Like, soon as you make that doodle on the napkin, like you own the copyright to that doodle, to that work. Copyright, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to click. Oop. Here we go. Copyright lasts a long time. So typically, it's the life of the author plus 70 years. So that's the person who has created that work. Or if it's owned by corporate authorship, another way to think of it is like a business. It is usually 120 years from the date that it was created. And so an example of this might be your instructors who work here at the university. Sometimes like let's say they've made a presentation, they've made a quiz, like they've made content. Sometimes they own that copyright, but then sometimes that copyright is owned actually by the school, just to give you kind of a comparison of what that might look like. And then once copyright expires, it does pass into the public domain. So we will be talking about the public domain a little bit more detail, but the main idea about public domain is that at this point, it's no longer owned by a specific person and therefore can be used by others. I'm going to stop there and just see, even if you want to just give a thumbs up, if, we're all on the same page, maybe that feels kind of familiar to you, which is great. But I also just want to stop and see if anyone has any questions. Awesome. Thank you.
I was going to say, can I just ask a quick question just to see?
Yeah.
A little fun fact about the whole corporations, their copyright is 120 years. Anybody have a guess as to what corporation really kind of helped make that change to 120 years?
The reason why it is that long, it's a long
yes,
time.
It's very long. And that was changed during the 20th century. They really made that time period much longer. When copyright first came about, it was not that long. I don't know if anyone has a guess as to which company. Yes, it is. Ooh, DuPont's a good guess, though. That's probably more like trademark, but it's absolutely Disney. Disney did not want to give up or lose their rights to all of the money that they can make off of Mickey and stuff. So there you go.
Yeah, we blame Mickey Mouse.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're talking about copyright specifically, what we're talking about is a work that's in a fixed, tangible medium or expression. So this can include literary rights, which was mentioned earlier. I think we think about a lot in terms of like actual writing. But I think we see probably the most copyright cases like enter the news when it comes into musical works, right? I know that Ed Sheeran just won a case that was a copyright case recently. I forget about, like, was it Thinking Out Loud was the song?
Yeah, it had something to do with Marvin Gaye, that perhaps he had stolen from Marvin Gaye.
So I do think you hear this in the news quite frequently when it comes to music, but it also includes dramatic works, choreographed works, architecture, pictures, movies, films, sound. Notice that all of this is kind of like a tangible expression of something. So this doesn't qualify from what we call unfixed works. And so basically think of unfixed works as something that's improvised, like improvised music, speeches, dances that are improvised as well. If you make it up on the spot, that's not necessarily going to qualify for copyright. So I think that's something that's helpful to be aware of. Now, there are some instances of things that are not protected by copyright. And the thing I really want to emphasize here is that copyright isn't designed to reward like hard work. The point of it is to foster creativity. So if something takes a lot of effort to make, that doesn't necessarily qualify it for copyright protection. It is about fostering creativity and the fact that the person who has created it has the ability basically to make money off of that creativity, to be able to be in control of how that work is used so that they're inspired to put in the work, which I think is an interesting distinction to make. And so copyright does not necessarily include like procedures or different methods. Sometimes that is covered by patents, which we're not going to go into too much detail here, but know that that does not necessarily qualify for copyright. I think one of the things that's really interesting on here is that often something like a recipe does not qualify for copyright because it's just a list of ingredients. You've done the work to pull those together, but it is not necessarily considered a creative endeavor, which I think is quite interesting. Also know that typically works made by the US government are not covered by copyright. The thought there being that these things are done for the good of the public on whole. And so typically works created by the US government qualify within the like public domain aspect. And this also includes things like facts. Facts cannot be copyrighted. And then I'm going to end by just mentioning again that, again, we're talking about fixed works. So things that are improvised typically are not covered by copyright as well. And we've already talked about this a little bit, but I really do want to emphasize that the purpose of copyright is to foster intellectual creativity. So, and I think another part of this, not just to talk about like, you'll be able to like gain something financially, but also recognition of having put in the effort and the creativity to be able to create something. And so when we're talking about copyright, I think coming in with that perspective of its purpose can be helpful. So keep that in mind as we go through the rest of this presentation, because I think we all want to be recognized for like the thing that we came up with, right? Even if it's an illegal capacity or not. So those are kind of the basics of copyright. However, I do want to talk a little bit about like, okay, that exists. That's great. Whoop-de-doo. Like, why should I care? How is this applicable to me? And so I do have a quick poll I want to check in with you guys. So in a moment, you're going to see a poll come up on your screen, and it's going to ask you just some like basic yes or no questions to start us thinking about like how this applies to our everyday lives. So hopefully you can see that poll on your screen. I'm going to give you a moment to fill it out. I'm going to read through a couple of these as we go along. But I'm going to give you a second. And so let's start with number one. Have you ever worked on a project and have someone use or take your work without permission? So it looks like 4 out of 7 of us have. That's a pretty good number of people. I'm thinking of even just like all of the like school projects I've worked on, where someone has like taken my stuff and pretended it was their own. And I think here there's a little bit of a conversation of like plagiarism versus copyright. We're going to be talking about this from the perspective of copyright. But I think this is something that really frames how this is applicable to you as a person and you as a student. So in this instance, of course, if you like, everyone loves working on group projects, right? It's your favorite. It's the best. No? Okay. But this is an instance where like being aware that like, yeah, copyright applies to you as a student. So if someone else is taking your work, then yeah, that is a copyright violation. So it definitely applies to you as like a student and not just as a person. And I think as an expectation, there's a whole code of conduct that you'll find at every college and every university when it comes to something like academic dishonesty. And I think knowing that copyright applies to you as a student is important within that context. Have you ever had a job or internship where you're asked to create content like a flyer or a brochure? So in this instance, it looks like we have one person who said yes. We've had quite a few people who say no. So that's really interesting to me. It might just be the line of work that I'm in personally, but I'm always making presentations and handouts and brochures. And I think something to keep in mind here is that it's very easy to do something like take images from Google and incorporate that in our presentations in whatever work that we're creating. And that can have real legal implications for certain professions and the job that you're doing. And so knowing that like as a person who like makes some sort of content, even let's say if you're in like a coder, if you're using someone else's content, that can have a legal implication for the business that you work for. And then let's see, I thought we'd get some yeses here. Do you have a creative outlet when it comes to writing a song, doing art, coding, etc.? It looks like lots of us have like a creative outlet. And so one thing I want you to keep in mind is that copyright is there to protect you as well. So if you've written a song and you've posted it on TikTok, or you have a design that you put online, like you have that copyright. And if someone else uses that to make money or uses it without your permission, like it's not just to protect other people, copyright is there to protect you as well. Oh, sorry. And I saw we had a comment in the chat, just checking in.
Yes,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead, Heather.
Oh, no, I was going to say, someone was commenting that in their place of work, specifically at Amazon, that they have to be very careful about the images they use, exactly for the reasons that you were saying. And I was responding that, yes, definitely something to pay attention to in the workplace. I think it's going to come up regardless of what workplace you're in, things that you need to be aware of.
Yeah, and so like even the presentation that I made here today, there's a few images where I specifically went to a place that has Creative Commons images that said I didn't need to give attribution. So know that whatever image I've used in this presentation, I have searched through a Creative Commons lens. And if I need to provide a citation for it or recognize that I've gotten permission, I've included that in this presentation. So that's for you as a student and at your job and whatever you use. Another example I have here on the screen, I bought a house 4 years ago and I've had a lot of fun like updating it and painting rooms, and like my husband and I love art and all that type of stuff. And we actually really liked an image by a local artist. And in theory, we could have just taken this image and painted it on our wall without her permission. But she's a very well-known artist. And so we contacted her and we said, hey, we would love to take some of your art and paint it on the wall in our sunroom. Could we pay you for that? Can we license the ability to use that image? And so she granted us the ability, part of her copyright, talking about how you can rent, lend, or sell part of a copyright. And so I want you to know this is something that I also like practice as I preach. I wouldn't probably even display this image on here without knowing that I had like bought the license to this image. And to be very honest with you, we have people come over all the time and be like, oh, is that so-and-so's art? I recognize that. And I'm like, yes, we licensed the art from her. Otherwise, I think it might get back to her that like these people just painted her art all over their house and like basically we stole it from her, which would be awkward. I don't want to do that to a local artist, right? And so I think this is just one example of how to like conceptualize of how copyright can enter your life kind of in everyday ways. Now, I know what you're thinking because I'm thinking of this as well. Hasn't modern technology made copyright obsolete? So when we're saying modern technology here, we're talking about the internet. Like it's so easy to share. I mean, just thinking about like social media and how easy it is to build off of other people's work, use images online. A lot of the time I see students will even like include an image in a paper and they don't include a citation for it and they don't make note if they're even allowed to use that image. And so just so you know, that is part of the expectation for whatever content you use, is to show that you put forth the effort to see if you have access to that image. Do you have the right to use it in that paper? And then to recognize where you got it from. And so I am going to go ahead and acknowledge that, yeah, like it's super easy just to pull something off of the internet. And it does feel like in a lot of instances, like, I don't know, who's going to care if I took this? And I definitely recognize that as a reality in your everyday life. But I do want to emphasize, as we kind of started this section talking about, like the hope of this workshop is that you develop an awareness enough to take a step back when you're about to do something like take an image online, take someone else's work in some capacity to ask like, okay, within the context of how I'm planning on using this, is this appropriate? And so I really want to emphasize from an academic perspective, it is good scholarly practice and expectation that you keep copyright in mind and whatever you do as a student. So that includes, you know, the images you might find online, the words you might take from somebody else, the code you might use when you're in a coding class. We do have something called a code of conduct at SFCC, and copyright definitely falls within that. So just as a student, it's something that you want to be aware of. Oh, good question. Ooh, so, oh, sorry, Heather, it looked like you're about to say something.
No, I was just going to read the question aloud. So the question is, what if the image you're using came from a source that they themselves did not give recognition to, whom they acquired it from originally? How do you know who to give recognition to then?
And so I think sometimes it's hard to talk about copyright without talking about plagiarism. And so we actually have two different kind of concepts going on here. So one, copyright is basically the permission to use content or not. And so as a student, Heather's going to be talking about this in a moment. We have something called fair use. And so the idea of fair use is that there's certain circumstances under which you're more likely to be able to use something. And so sometimes that doesn't require like outright permission. Instead, it requires you kind of considering a couple different factors to say like, I feel like since I'm using this as a student from an educational purpose, that like, I don't necessarily need like official permission. I'm going to use this as a student. And so I feel that I have a right to do that under fair use. So one, that's just determining if you can use that image. So that's copyright. However, the attribution part is the plagiarism aspect. So plagiarism says, that you acknowledge where that source is coming from. I hope I'm making sense. There's kind of like a little Venn diagram between like plagiarism and copyright. So the question that you're asking is a little bit more about plagiarism. So not if you can use the source, but how you should like cite the source. So in this instance, you'll notice that not every source has an author name. It doesn't always say where it came from. So when it comes to creating that citation, you're just going to cite where you found it. So in that instance, I would say this is maybe a little bit more of a plagiarism question. We can go
or
over
a citation question.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant citation. A little bit more of a citation question. And so my recommendation here would be that you just cite the actual like website, book, wherever you found that source. I hope that makes sense. Sorry, go ahead, Heather.
Oh, no, I was going to tack on to that. Yes. One, I'm going to reiterate what Sharday said. If you are using something, you need to provide attribution. That's just ethical use of information. And so typically you provide the information for how you yourself found that content. So even if the source you're looking at doesn't cite it, you would just cite the source that you are looking at. Now, that being said, I will tell you that as a librarian, I'm guessing Sharday and I, if we were in this situation, we would try and track down that image wherever it originally came from. We might use like Google reverse image search if it was an image, some other type of way of trying to find that. So. But a good question, because as Sharday pointed out, there is a lot of overlap between copyright and attribution or citations. So thank you for that question.
And so I think both with creating citations and copyright, there is something to be said for putting forth the effort in trying to determine. So like I said, we're going to be talking about fair use in a moment. And that's kind of part of that process of, did you try to find it someplace else? If you weren't able to, then you might feel like, well, I put forth that effort, so I'm just going to cite it from where I found it. And then just really quickly, from a professional perspective, just like school, probably there's more like legal implications when it comes to using content in a work capacity. If ever you do come to a job where you have to create something like a presentation, a website, design something, even a flyer, it is good and important to keep copyright in mind, because that doesn't necessarily just come back to you, that comes back to your employer as a whole. And then just personally, going back to this idea that copyright's in place to protect you as well as anyone else. I don't know if anybody is big on social media and you feel like you've created some content that you're well known for and someone else takes that and gets credit for it. You're going to be really frustrated about that, right? But you, even though it happens all the time, know that depending, on where you find yourself, you are protected by copyright. And so that's something to keep in mind with whatever you do online as well.
And to tack on to something when Sharday was talking about professional reasons for this, another one that I think we've been talking about images and, we talked about music and stuff, but music's another one of those ones you have to be you have to be careful with copyright, especially in a professional setting. You can't just say, oh, I'm working in the store by myself, I'm just going to, plop in my playlist and let everybody listen to my playlist. There's even copyright coverage for that type of situation. Hence why you listen to a lot of music in stores. So.
Or I know another example, we have a lot of student organizations on campus. And sometimes, you want to play a movie, like a movie night for something. And so you think, I'm just going to log into my Netflix account and show that. That is something you want to be a little wary of, because you actually can purchase a license to show a film. And often that has to occur for you to be able to do that without a copyright infringement involved. So definitely you will see this pop up kind of in your everyday life. I also have a few examples on the side here, just to give you some more context of what this might look like. I think some feel very common to us, like you can't record a movie in a theater, selling merchandise or making money off of someone else's copyrighted image. And again, copyright isn't something you have to file for. If someone else has made that image, there's already copyright implied. Including someone else's photographs on your websites, posting a video of a song on a company website. So you can see how this is something that you can very easily slip into. in a number of different ways in your everyday life. And so I did have a couple other examples, but I think I'm actually going to hand it over to Heather. I want to make sure that you have enough time to cover fair use.
Okay.
Do you want me to be in charge of the screen, or do you want to?
You know what? I will do my screen.
Okay.
So that way. Okay.
Okay, I am going to pause here and just check in with everybody. Was I making sense when it came to like that distinction between kind of like the idea of copyright, which is the idea that you have permission to use an image, versus creating a citation? So okay, makes sense. I'm getting yeses. Oh, good. I was worried I wasn't making sense. So that's great.
I was going to say, sometimes as librarians, we tend to overcomplicate things from time to time. So thank you very much. All right. So Sheridan has provided us some information about like what copyright is and what those rights are. And so I know sometimes right now you're thinking, but I know I can use some copyrighted stuff, right? And that comes into this next part of the presentation where I'm going to talk about fair use. And just so you realize, fair use is something that's written into the U.S. copyright statute, right? Copyright is an actual law. And basically, it allows permission for people to use limited portions of works, including quotes, and typically for reasons like commentary or criticism, news reporting, scholarly reports. Okay, so fair use is built into the copyright law. The problem is that fair use is not just a yes, there's no one who's going to be able to go out there and say, yes, you can absolutely do that, or no, you can't do that at all. Fair use is really more of a critical thinking, checks and balances kind of system, okay? So really when it comes to fair use, we are going to have kind of 4 factors that you need to consider. And when I was preparing for this, I like that someone goes, well, think of it as PANE, P-A-N-E. The first thing that you want to consider is the purpose and the character of the use of this source. Like, why is it that you want to use this copyrighted source? And typically copyright, or I should say fair use, is more inclined to allow you to use a source if it's for nonprofit educational purposes, right? It's not going to say, yeah, you've got fair use, so you can go out and make money off of this. It's not going to really encourage or allow commercial use of somebody else's work. So it's really focused on the purpose of how you plan on using it. Okay. And as I said, they did build into that, you might be using this in a sort of educational way of providing a criticism or some news reporting, that type of thing. It also will allow you, though, perhaps to use what they call transformative, which means you're not just photocopying it, right? You're not just, sharing that image that you found online and sharing it out and everything. Instead, perhaps you are doing something with it to provide new meaning. So like if you're using a quote from an essay, you're providing some additional context, your own thoughts are related around it, that type of thing. Or if you're doing like a multimedia product, it's more about integrated into something else. You're not just simply copying, pasting, and there's nothing new that you're adding to the conversation, if you will.
And it can get a little complicated, but like the degree of transformation might be taken into consideration as well. And sorry, I'm just going to add.
No, please do.
We don't expect you guys to like memorize all of these things. Like it gets super complicated. And that's why at the start of the presentation, we even say, we're not lawyers. We can't give legal advice. Like this can get quite complicated. The purpose here, though, is just for you to know that there's some instances under which like you might be more inclined to be able to use something, especially as a student. Mm-hmm. So these are just to kind of help you make that like decision process. It's honestly not even a situation where a librarian could tell you yes or no, that's okay. Just because, again, we can't give legal advice and it gets quite complicated. But as a student, if you kind of go through this thought process, you might be able to feel a little bit more certain that like, okay, like the example we had earlier about an image. I don't have direct permission to use this image, but I feel like because I'm a student and I'm using it for an educational purpose, I'm going to go ahead and use this image, and I'm going to make sure I put a citation with it. And so just from a student's perspective, I feel like I've covered all my bases. And that's the main thing that we want you to take away from this process. We're not trying to scare you by any means. Sorry, Go ahead, Heather.
Oh, no, that's okay. And I'll quick delve into these, but just, it's the purpose of the use, the amount of the work used, the nature of the work, and the effect on the market or value. And so I do have linked here in our presentation, which will be available later on our workshop guide. But this link should take you somewhere. There
I think you have check marks next to the.
Yeah. Oh, I do. That's right. Thank you. See my brain. But anyway, there is I found this checklist that comes from a lot of different places here. Let me X out of that. Just to once again kind of remind you of what you could be looking for when you are thinking about fair use. So these 4 factors, they did kind of give you a checklist. I will say this is coming from a university, so their thought is if you were a faculty member, you might want to keep track of it. And I know I've heard Sharday say this in other presentations, keeping track of your thinking when it comes to fair use. We say this a lot to faculty, but it goes for anybody. If you have some concern about it, keep this checklist or jot down your thinking on why you thought you were able to use this under fair use, because that way, if anyone ever does question whether or not you are allowed to use it under fair use, you have something that you can refer back to. Okay. So, yes. So here's a nice little graphic also that kind of shows, remember we said fair use is kind of like a balancing act, if you will, or sort of a sliding scale, I guess is a better way of putting it. So I already talked about the purpose and character of use. So you typically have a stronger case for fair use if it's nonprofit, if it's educational, if it's transformative, right? The second one was the amount and substantiality of the work used. And so what this means is typically the less that you use of a source, the more likely it's going to fall under fair use. Now, here's the other thing though. If you notice on this little sliding scale, on the left-hand side, it goes, well, not if it's the heart of the work. And what that means is kind of if you've taken the most important aspect of this work, and that could be if it's a book or an article, it's the meatiest section, the meatiest part that everybody wants to know more about. Or if it's really the epitome of how the book was designed or how the photograph was compiled or composition of it, that's going to count as the heart of the work, and it might actually reduce your ability to use fair use. Sharday?
I think I have an example. I read an article recently. I forget who it was about. It was a biography about someone historical that someone had published, and a news outlet had basically taken that biography and then wrote an article about it where they the main juicy part of the biography, they basically summarized in an article. So now no one has to buy that book anymore. So I think that's an example of maybe they only wrote a page or two. So by comparison, it's not most of the book, but it was the reason why people would buy the book. So I think that's a good example of something being the heart of the work. So even though it wasn't the larger portion, it was the incentive, right? Especially when it came to that recognition and money part. So I think that might be a helpful example.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the reasons that part, or there was a court case years ago in the 70s when President Ford wrote his autobiography. And to be fair, I guess everybody was really interested in reading the whole biography. They only wanted to know his reasoning for pardoning former President Nixon. And so there was, as Sharday said, same thing, magazine article where somebody was like, hey, here's the part where he talks about pardoning Nixon. And they were like, well, now nobody wants to write the book. So it wasn't considered fair use. Yeah. Then you go on to sort of the nature of the copyrighted work. So this kind of goes back to what Sharday was talking about before. if this work was already published, because a lot of times you also have copyright for unpublished things, okay? Remember, copyright is automatic. The moment you create it, it has a copyright attached to it, regardless of whether it's published or not published. If it is published, you have a stronger case for fair use because the creator has already allowed some type of sharing to get out there, whereas if it's unpublished, maybe a little bit less because it's up to them how they want to share their content. And then once again, typically, if it's more factual, reporting that type of thing, you might go a little more for the stronger defense of fair use for that. All right. And then once again, then that also comes down to fair use usually applies, as we're saying here, more broadly to like a nonfiction work. Okay. As for the last one, effective your use on the marketplace, this kind of gets a bit back to what Sharday and I were talking about, also with the amount and substantiality of the work used. Because when they wrote that magazine article about those biographies, okay, they impacted the creator's ability to make money off of their own work, right? Now people didn't want to buy the biography because they already got the most important aspects of it. So you are actually impacting the creator's income. The greater impact you have on the creator being able to earn money off of their creation, you're going to, not be able to use fair use, right? So this is also why you can't come in and say, hey, I'm going to borrow that course reserve from the library and photocopy the whole book, right? Because you have now, once again, you've taken a lot of the work. It's the heart of the work. And you could have bought the textbook and you're impacting the publisher's ability to make money off of that. That may not be the best example because, textbooks cost a lot of money. But anyway,
we recognize that.
We recognize that, but we also understand that that is their copyright. And so they have that. Okay. So the other thing to note is when it comes to fair use, this is a sliding scale. And it's not just like, oh, I think I'm good under number one because it's just for educational purposes. I don't have to think about the other three. No, you do need to think about all four factors when you are trying to determine fair use. Okay. Now, I know we've just told you, kind of like all the stuff of like, maybe you can use it or whatever, lots of things to think about. There are options in relation to copyright where you are allowed, where the copyright holder has expressly provided permission to use their sources. And this is what we refer to as Creative Commons licensing. Or I should just say in general, licensing is when perhaps companies or creators or authors have allowed others to use their information or their content, I should say.
Oh, and sorry, there is a couple assessment questions at the end that are pretty basic. Just know that this is one of the questions. So we're going to ask you what Creative Commons is. So it's not a assessment.
So Creative Commons is simply when the creator of the work has provided a license that allows additional use to others. Okay. Now, there are different types of Creative Commons licenses, and this is typically what it looks like. You may see this, I'm going to say image or logo at the bottom of like presentations or works or something like that. So you have your CC BY, that's this first one. And that basically just says, as long as you just give us attribution, that's what you need to do. You need to tell people where you actually got the source, but otherwise you are welcome to, share this source. Then you have your BY SA. This means basically it's Creative Commons licensed and you can share this alike. So when you go to put this in your work, like if you're using my image and I'm allowing you to use it, you also have to provide the same type of licensing on your product for that. This bottom one it's a CC BY. So once again, you're allowed to use it, but you cannot use it but it's only for non-commercial use. Okay. So yes, you can use this, but you can't make any money off of it. So that kind of comes back to this idea of like, if you were in the workplace and you were adding somebody's music to a presentation that you were using at work, but maybe your company makes money off of people subscribing to watch your presentations, you have just turned it into a commercial work. And so therefore it wouldn't be allowed under this non-commercial license. You have you can see how they all kind of build on each other, right? CC BY, non-commercial, share alike. So once again, yes, you can use this for non-commercial reasons. And if you do, you have to provide the same licensing. You have to say anyone else who wants to share this has to use the same licensing as you. Then there's the CC BY, but no derivatives. So one of the cool things with Creative Commons licensing, as we talked about sort of in fair use, that transformative nature where you can kind of add more to it. Some people don't want you to. They're like, you can use this, but you can't change it in any way. And so that's considered your non-derivative. Okay. So think of it like you couldn't take their photograph and turn it into a meme. Okay. Because that would be a derivative. All right. And then last but not least over here, you have your CC BY non-commercial, non-derivative license, which means, yes, you can use it. You can't make money off of it. You can't make derivatives off of it. So by the way, just so you know, in terms of Creative Commons, like this first license, the CC BY, you could take someone else's work and make money off of it. They haven't restricted that there. I know it sounds really wonky in the whole copyright. You don't want to impact somebody's income, but a license, the creator has allowed that. Okay. They have basically said, yes, I own copyright, but I'm allowing you to use it in a commercial way if you wanted to. All right.
And please know, no one expects you to have all of these memorized. Obviously, you can just like look at it and Google it, but know a lot of times that people actually link directly to the Creative Commons license. So if something does have a Creative Commons license, I always just click on it and read what exactly I can and cannot do. So they make it pretty easy for you to figure that out.
Yeah. And not only is this just about how you yourself can use it, like I know a lot of times, like I'll look at Creative Commons license because I'm using it. Obviously, we're in an educational setting, but like if I was a student, I'd be using it in a presentation. But also note, if you are the creator of content, right? We said that a lot of us are creative people and we create our own stuff. You yourself can put a Creative Commons license on it. So that's really helpful. Like maybe if, you know, some people might do it as a marketing thing. You know, I want more people to hear my music, so I'm going to allow it to be, I would probably go with the non-commercial, non-derivative option so that people could share my music and get it out there. So it's not just about how you're using the information, but you yourself as a creator can provide these licenses.
There's been a couple of times where I've been like, oh man, I didn't put a Creative Commons license on that and someone used my stuff and I didn't want them to use my stuff. Sorry, I just wanted to add that.
No, it's totally true. So you want to be, you know, it's something to be aware of. Now, so then where can you actually look for Creative Commons? And that's kind of what I did with this slide. And Sharday, before we put this up, I'm going to have to put my links in it. Apparently I forgot to do that yesterday. But some of these, like Google Images actually has, whoops, let me go back there for a second. But Google Images has an option where you can look at the usage rights. So let's say, for instance, okay, I'm not going to lie, I totally love my dogs. So I'm just going to say dogs. I know you're all thinking librarian, cats, whatever. But if you go under tools, you'll see it pops up here. And one of them is usage rights. And when you drop it down, you can actually say, hey, just give me images that fall under Creative Commons. And so these are images that apparently have been marked as Creative Commons. And so I could click on them and then read what the license allows me to do with it. You know, so this is a way that you can find something that you can put into your presentations without necessarily having to weigh fair use because they've already allowed me that license. I'm also going to tell you, I sometimes do it if I'm looking for something that's not an image. I'll try it in Google, but then as part of my search term, I might say dogs, and then I'll say also CC BY or CC BY SA. You know, I kind of choose one of the licensing things, and I'll just include it as part of my search term if that's important to me. Okay. I'm not going to say it's always 100%, but it kind of helps out that way. The other place that you can find it is obviously Wikipedia. Wikipedia, this one, I'll actually click on this one here. It may get me into the JPEGs. Wikimedia Commons provides also a lot of content that has been creatively licensed or is in the public domain. So this is another place where you can come and you can just, search for images, videos, whatever, and they'll have those types of licensing types and things like that. Okay. Now, there are some other ones, like if you're looking for images, Pixabay and Unsplash have some beautiful images there. And they have information about their licensing. Once again, YouTube, if you do a search, once you've done the search, there's a filter option, and under filter, you go to features and you can choose Creative Commons. So there's that option there. Europeana also allows you to filter your results with, can I use this? That's actually that's European based, but it has a lot of good cultural stuff. And then Jamendo and FMA are places where you can go to look for different types of music that's royalty free or has been Creative Commonly licensed. There's other stuff out there, but these are kind of ones that, I use Pixabay, Unsplash, Wikimedia a lot. So just kind of sharing that those are options for you. Okay. So now that we've talked about some places that you can do this, I do want to talk to you a little bit about your note sharing websites. So when I say note sharing websites, I'm talking about the websites where you may upload content, to help with study aids. So think like Course Hero or Chegg or something like that, right? And one of the things, and if you go to some of them, if you go directly to Course Hero, they'll even say this, they only accept uploads of content from the copyright holder or from only if you have expressed permission from the copyright holder. Now, to be fair, I think we can all say that we've seen content that has been uploaded to these various sites where the copyright holder has not expressly given their permission. So we do want to point this out because as students, yes, some of those sources can be really helpful when you're trying to study, but you are still required to abide by copyright. And the content that your instructors create, okay, like right now, Sharday and I created this presentation. We own the copyright for this presentation, okay? Or the college does if it's work product, that type of thing. Tests, study notes, lectures, presentations, whatever. Your instructor, unless they have, provided some type of a license that allows you to share their information, holds that copyright. So just remember that if you are going to one of these sites, if you are uploading content from your class, make sure you have permission from the copyright holder. And please note that, remember while we said some of those licensing say you can do this as long as it's non-commercial, the study websites are commercial services. They make money off of subscriptions. Even if you personally are not paying a subscription, maybe you've, done something, you don't have to pay it. They are a commercial entity. And so therefore that is a commercial purpose. All right. I think that's all I had to say about note sharing websites.
Yeah. I think note sharing websites is one of those things that sometimes we assume all students know about, and maybe some students don't. Does anybody have any questions about what a note sharing website is? No. Okay.
All right.
Just want to double check.
Oh, so I did put up here. Yes, you can only upload content if you have the express permission. All right.
All right. So that was our main jam for you. We do just want to end with a little bit of a summary here. So copyright, as we mentioned, is the permission or ability to use a work. So you can make a copy or use someone else's intellectual property when the copyright has expired. So when that happens, I realized I accidentally skipped my slides on public domain, but the main idea behind public domain is that it no longer has copyright. There's no longer specific ownership over it. So anyone can use that work. You can make a copy of content, obviously, if you own the copyright for that work. or if the holder has given you permission to do it. So we're looking at that Creative Commons options there. Or when work is governed by a license, again, granting you the ability to use it. So again, here we're kind of looking at Creative Commons. And then finally, you're making a copy because it's permitted through something like fair use. Maybe you've gone through that checklist and come to the decision that what you want to use is okay based off of kind of weighing those 4 factors that you've considered. I think, Heather, can you go ahead and click to the next slide?
Oh, yes. Sorry, I forgot I was controlling it.
Yeah, you're in control.
I forgot.
Here, I will go ahead and put the link to this guide in the chat. So know that we don't expect you to have all of this memorized. That would be impressive indeed. But we do have a copyright, what we call a library guide, where you can find all this information again, including this presentation. And once we've edited the recording, there will also be a recording of this presentation as well. So if you click on that link, the one I pasted was just directly from the URL. So if you want, you can also feel free just to write down that bit.ly link. It's a little bit shorter if you want to get access to this information again. And also, do you guys have any questions? Thank you so much for, joining us today.